All right.
Recording in progress.
So we are ready. We are on the air. We are in the sky. Where are we? Where does this go, Melanie? Just out of curiosity.
It goes on YouTube.
YouTube, but does it go up into the cloud forever? Are we going to be up there like the angels on the
Yes.
clouds forever?
Probably.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Okay. Well, this is me and Melanie, the director of the library. Once again, we are, what do you call this? Pre-recording it.
Yes.
So this is not Friday, the 15th. It's Monday, the 12th. So the weather we're going to talk about is happening now. Now, who knows what it's going to be doing on Friday,
Right.
right? Okay. And I was thinking this morning, this will be a fun talk because everybody likes to talk about the weather,
Yeah.
right? However, before we get there, I want to back up and go over something that is peculiar in the universe and wonderful for us on this planet, because if it wasn't this peculiar aspect of water
Mm.
and what happens when it gets cold, we wouldn't be sitting here, you and me.
Right.
Probably nothing else that was alive would be sitting here. So we have to thank chemistry, among other things, for the fact that life is here on this wonderful Goldilocks planet. So, water, let's go back to basics. Everything, but we're going to focus on water because it's so strange. It's not like everything else.
Are you gonna quiz me on chemistry?
No, I won't.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna lie.
Relax, relax. But you could answer this.
Okay.
The three phases of water or the three states of water. What are they?
Gas, liquid, ice.
Yes. On Earth, at our average temperatures, we have water existing in those three phases: gases, liquids, and ice. Now, that's not true everywhere in the universe, right? Especially in our solar system. But for us, it's a wonderful thing. And to go from one state or phase to the other, you either have to add heat energy to make it happen, or you take the heat away to make it happen. So what I started with, if you have a chunk of ice and you apply heat to it, it gradually begins to melt into water. Keep heating it, and the water will evaporate into vapor or water gas. That's called, well, I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, an endothermic reaction, because you're putting heat in to accomplish it. And if you want to go the other way, you have to take the heat out. Start with vapor or steam. Then you take away some heat and it becomes liquid. More heat and it becomes ice. Now, the interesting thing about water, and I had never really thought about this either. Let's go with the gin and tonic in the summertime, okay? You drink gin and tonic?
I don't.
You don't? Oh, well, I don't drink them a lot, but once in a blue moon in the summertime, it's just right. So you get out your tonic and your gin and your ice cubes in your glass, and it's probably 80 degrees in the house. So what's going to happen to the ice in your glass?
It's gonna melt.
Going to melt. Where is it getting the heat from?
The air around it.
Well, what's the ice in? Oops. She's going to escape the quiz because a customer has come into the library. She had that planned. Alrighty. What happens is, let me think. Let's go back to picturing what's really going on the atomic level. That we can't see it, but it's there and it's underneath everything, supports everything, is everything. Let's start with the ice. The water, H2O, one oxygen, two little hydrogens, are hooked together magnetically, and they form a lattice, which is fairly tight and held together and is rigid. That's why ice is solid. Now, as you apply heat energy, it increases the motion of the molecules in the lattice. And if they get warm enough, up to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, then the bonds begin to break apart. They spread out further and they begin to melt. But what's interesting is that glass of gin and tonic is if you stir all the ice around in the gin and tonic, eventually the whole glass will be 32 degrees. The ice is 32 and the gin and tonic has become 32. It'll stay at 32 until all the ice is melted, even though you're applying heat. Where's that heat going? It's going to breaking the bonds to create the liquid.
Oh, sure.
And the same thing happens going from a liquid to a gas. And reverse. You have to take away the heat to make it go backwards, say backwards from gas to liquid to ice. And once again, as long as that process is going on and it's in a closed system, the temperature doesn't change. So we don't feel any difference, even though we're adding heat or taking it away. So we call it latent heat. And that's why, remember we said they grow the grapes on the shores of the lake because a large body of water, H2O, takes a long time to change temperature. It's partly because of those bonds between the water molecules, and it takes energy to either release them or to form them.
Sure.
So it's cooler longer in the spring, so the buds don't come out early, and it's warmer longer in the fall, so you have an extended harvest season. It's all because of the latent heat in the magic of those bonds. Now, if we have time, I don't know if we will, but at the end of the talk, I also finally figured out why ice floats. Because once again, that is breaking all the rules. Okay, but we'll keep that to the end. Alrighty, where are we going with this? Alrighty. Once again, just briefly reviewing how clouds form, because clouds almost always you need clouds to have precipitation. We've mentioned a few times they don't have to be there. The sun is shining and we still get some precipitation. Where is that coming from? Alrighty. So once again, you have a column of air and it's warmed, it expands, it rises up. As it does it, the temperature drops. Eventually you reach that magic dew point where all of a sudden humidity is 100%. Can't hold anymore. It starts to condense out either as raindrops or, if it's cold enough, snowflakes or ice crystals. Alrighty. And the thing I learned, and we'll apply it in a little bit, is that most of us say, oh, the magic number is 32. You get down to 32 and the water changes to ice. That's not always true in the atmosphere. Because remember we said to condense, they need some little tiny microscopic particles floating around in the non-pure air. Well, if the air, and once in a while this happens, is almost pure, almost dustless, no fumes from the cars, smog floating up into it, then the water keeps getting colder and colder. Can actually go down to, do you remember what I minus what?
-40.
Minus 40 Fahrenheit, which is damn cold. Pretty cold. Super cooled water droplets. And we'll talk about what happens.
And that's without turning to ice.
Without, yeah, they're just very cold water drops.
Okay.
Yeah. Alrighty. Now, my second point was what causes air to rise? And so once again, a quick review. The sun warms the ground, warms the air. Warm air is less dense, it rises up and it cools. And when it reaches that, the more humid the air, the sooner the dew point is reached. So the lower the cloud base will be. If it's very dry air, it's got to rise a lot higher before it hits the dew point. Air has to go over topography. Everything's not a flat plain like eastern Kansas. We have mountain ranges. So the air mass has to go up the mountain ranges. That's going to cool it down. causing clouds. We have fronts, which we talked about briefly, and we'll talk about more. I think next time we're gonna talk about wind.
Mhm.
I think that's next time. And then we'll talk about fronts and how they cause air to rise. Alrighty, that's, I think, it for review. Now, where's part two? Okay, this is the fun part.
Okay.
We're gonna talk about the weather. What was the old, there were two old jokes 50, 60 years ago when I first came to Alfred. One was, what do you guys do here in the summertime? Oh, in the summer, on the 4th of July, we go swimming. Because back then, it was so cool in the summer that you really, and the
Oh.
pond stays so cold, you really didn't go swimming much in the
Mhm.
summer. And the other joke was, well, if you don't like what the weather's doing today, wait tomorrow, it'll be different.
Right.
So that's true too. Alrighty, let's talk about rain. Now, once again, I haven't primed Melanie here, so we'll just come up with some phrases we have, like drizzle. What are some things we call rain?
Uh, drizzle, deluge.
Deluge,
Um,
biblical deluge,
we say it's raining cats and dogs.
raining cats and dogs. I wonder where
Sprinkle,
that comes from.
shower.
I haven't thought sprinkle, haven't thought shower. Very good. So we, just like the Inuit, have lots of names for snow,
Mhm.
and people of a horse culture have lots of names for the
Mhm.
horse's colors. We have lots of phrases for different kinds of rain,
Mhm.
right? Okay, and there's nothing like that. Back in the day when we actually had winter that lasted 3-4
Mhm.
months for winter, and then you had that first spring rain,
Mhm.
and you could smell
Yeah.
the ground in response, or the pavement if you were in the city, to the rain. So downpours, drizzles, etc.
Mhm.
Let's talk now about too much rain, and then we'll talk about drought. We were talking before we started here, and many of you that are over 45 will remember the flood of 42. No,
72.
72. Thank
Do
you.
you want the picture?
Yeah, let's get some pictures. We all have images of the flood of 72. That, if we're old enough to remember.
There's some of
Do
them.
you remember? Did they say where it was? So I can.
This is an auto dealership in Wellsville, and this is the Sinclair Oil Refinery in Wellsville.
Oh, I bet they polluted a lot when the water all ran off, didn't they? Yes. Okay. Were those the two that you got?
No, we also have
Did you get the famous
picnic
table on the telephone pole?
Yes.
By the way, folks, the Hornell Library, at least they did 10 or so years ago, have a book, mostly pictures just of the flood of 72. So you might want to take it out. This is on Webb's Crossing Road, just upstream from the, what is it, the park there? What is
The
it?
Canacadea.
The Canacadea Park. And it's hard to believe, but the water was so high, it picked up a picnic bench and deposited it on top of one of these telephone poles. That is hard to believe, isn't it? Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my family had just moved back in the fall of 72, and I'd purchased some land up outside of Almond in the Car Valley. And the Tuesday before the rain started, we had just dug our 4-foot deep, 4.5-foot deep footing trench around the perimeter of the house to be. And we were renting in North Hornell, about a block or two from the fire station there in North Hornell, volunteer fire department. And the rain started, as I recall, Wednesday night, dinner time, and it rained hard all night. So when the fire alarm went off at 5 or 5:30 in the morning, woke me up. My first thought, how could there be a fire with all this rain? Well, of course, it wasn't a fire. So we all have memories of that. And the village of Almond, did you know the village of Almond was evacuated?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, and half of them went to live at the school for the week.
Yeah.
The other half have found friends and family to meet
Right.
them. That was quite adventuresome too. Alrighty, the reason for that flood, which was in June,
Mhm.
just before the Regents, so it was probably around the beginning of the third week of June
Mhm.
is my guess. It was due to a hurricane named
Mhm.
Agnes, which I guess meant that was the first named hurricane of the year, but with an A
Oh,
name.
yeah.
So in June. Normally hurricanes for the East Coast originate down in those warm waters of the South Atlantic, or possibly the Gulf of Mexico.
Mhm.
And then they drift north, usually up the coast and then out to sea. But this one, for some
Mhm.
reason, and I never did study the meteorological reasons for it, it decided to go straight up the Appalachian Mountains
Mhm.
to where finally on Wednesday, late Wednesday, it reached Western Pennsylvania, Western New York, that's us, and decided to dawdle. It just kind of sat there for 3 days,
Mhm.
slowly moving around, but not going anywhere. And as I recall, although in modern rainfalls with climate change, 11 inches is nothing.
Mm.
But back then it was a big deal.
Mhm.
And my guess is back then our snows lasted through March into April,
Sure.
and then they melted. And then we probably, I'm guessing now, I don't remember exactly. We probably had a fairly wet spring,
Mhm.
April, May. So the ground was already pretty saturated to begin with. So this 11 inches had nowhere to go
Mhm.
except downhill.
Did everyone have warning that it was coming?
I don't remember.
Oh, because like today, well,
Mm.
I don't think they could predict if it was gonna stall somewhere.
Right.
But
No, we didn't have nearly the kind of weather coverage
Okay.
or news coverage then as we did now.
Sure.
And I had 3 young children and we were building a house and I did listen to the news, but then again,
Yeah.
that reminds me, when the Second World War started for us with Pearl Harbor on a
Mhm.
Sunday, my father was still in the Marines, stationed out in the Brooklyn Navy Yard,
Mhm.
and they were living with my grandparents temporarily till he got restationed. And I'm thinking, wait a second, 45. We had come back from China.
Mhm.
He and my mom were stationed in China in the late 30s and early 40s, but we got home before the war started for us.
Mhm.
Anyway, it was Sunday and the family had gathered at my grandparents' house for Sunday dinner.
Mhm.
And I think it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Once again, when you do the time change,
Right.
my dad got off work at around 2 and walked in the front door and they're getting the dinner ready. And he says, well, I guess we were at war. And everybody, you see, people in the old days didn't listen to the news the way we do
Right.
now.
Right.
So anyways, that was a diversion. Sorry, guys. Floods. Alrighty. Now, I didn't ask Melanie to look up, but about 100 years ago, there was a disastrous flood down in Jonestown, PA,
Mm.
where a dam went.
Oh.
So that's besides just a lot of rain pouring down and filling up the stream beds and the
Mhm.
riverbeds and flooding. And with hurricanes near the ocean, of course, you have a different kind of flooding, but
Mhm.
we're going to talk about hurricanes in a couple of weeks.
Did the Almond Dam exist in 72?
Yes,
Was there a risk of that?
going? Not really. No, not really. And the reason that dam was built, going back even further, I think it was 1936.
Mm.
It was a summer thunderstorm
Mm.
that was outrageous for the times. And you know how Hornell sits down in this
Mhm.
hole, and all these hills and creeks around it pour down into it, including the Canacadea
Mhm.
Creek. So Hornell badly flooded. It
Okay.
was sort of like a flash flood in the summertime. And that's then when they built the
Okay.
Almond Dam. Condemned some of the, when I first moved back here in the 70s, you could still see the foundations on the Hornell side of Almond,
Mhm.
where they knew how high, if the whole dam filled up, how far back up towards Almond it would back.
Oh,
So
okay.
those houses were condemned,
Oh,
well, bought or whatever.
sure.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
yeah. Alrighty, so anyway, the Johnstown flood, I forget how many hundreds of people died. It
Mm.
was when it happens, it happens. And all of
Mhm.
a sudden, anybody downstream from whatever high it was, 100 feet, 50, I don't know how, I forget how high
Mm.
it was. You can look it up. Alrighty, what else? sometimes my abbreviations, even though I did them. Okay, 11 inches back then was quite a lot to happen within 3 days.
Mhm,
Now it's becoming the new normal.
mhm.
And who was it a year or so ago? Was it in Virginia? I think they had 27 inches in
Oh, wow.
24 hours.
Yeah.
So partly because the climate's warming, warmer water evaporates more,
Mhm.
so we're getting more humid weather. More humid weather
Mhm.
means more rain, and often in downpours. The other thing that's interesting, and we in the north don't tend to realize it, all the big cities in the south, think Houston, Phoenix, they have become heat islands.
Mm.
And the temperature within the city is
Mhm.
easily 10 to 15 degrees warmer
Mhm.
than simply outside the city. That's going to create cumulus clouds in the summertime, piling
Mm.
up and drifting off downwind, which is usually to the east.
Mhm.
So if you look at rainfalls, storms in the summer, say over Houston
Mhm.
and a 50-mile radius, you might get an inch in Houston, but 10 miles off to the east or northeast or southeast, it might be 2 or 3 inches, which is really, that's
Yeah.
something before we had cities,
Right.
before we had global warming, you didn't really have that sort of
Sure.
phenomenon, however you can use that word. Alrighty. What's the opposite of flooding? Too much water?
Drought.
Drought. Alrighty. I think some people know about the Anasazi who lived in the Southwest. Now, let me think, 900 years ago. They were a subsistence agricultural hunting gathering society living on the edge, just making it.
Mhm.
And then around just before 1100, for 23 years, there was a severe drought.
Mm.
Does this remind you of something that's happening in modern time? Yes, the Southwest is undergoing, I forget how many years now it's been
Mm.
in drought conditions. So in the year 1100, I can just see them sitting around their councils, their politicians, saying, you know what? We have fought this for 20 years. We were on the edge to begin with. We can't do it anymore.
Mhm.
And they basically, it was a mystery until recently, but basically they packed up and they
Mhm.
walked east to the Rio Grande River Valley,
Mm.
where they resettled in various, what became various, basically Hopi cultures
Mhm.
of the future. So when we settled the West, it was a lot of propaganda, partly on the railroad's part,
Mhm.
because the government gave land to the railroad barons
Mhm.
to sell on either side of their railroad tracks to encourage them to put the trains
Mm.
west. And so they had to sell these lands. And so they made them out to be what they really weren't. And very few people at the time actually called west of the middle of Kansas, 180 degrees north, south, desert. But it really was.
Mm.
Short grass prairie
Mhm.
and a real desert. And so farming just was not cut out for farming. And the droughts are periodical. Do you know how one of the ways we can find out when there were droughts over 1,000 years? Cut
tree
down a
ring?
tree.
Okay.
Yeah, tree rings. We all know that. We've all been Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts,
Mhm.
right? We got the tree rings. If they're fat, a good year, lots of
Mhm.
water. If they're skinny, a bad year, not
Mhm.
much water. And so the drought cycle comes and goes.
Mhm.
Alrighty. And it created the Dust Bowl in the
Mhm.
30s. And we're having a very hard time now in the last 10, 15 years. And I'm just talking about the high plains. So that's another problem we have with no rain. We won't even talk about the rest of the world where people don't have
Mhm.
water to drink anymore. Alrighty, flash floods. Why don't you tell me about what happened in Woodhull? Because you brought that up.
Oh, yeah.
What's flash floods mean, first of all?
It's a sudden rainfall
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stays there for a minute. It's a
Okay.
lot of rain really fast.
And usually it's high up in the watershed
Okay.
where we have small creeks.
Mhm.
It's not the Hudson River isn't going to have a flash flood because it's going to take a couple of days to build up and people aren't going to know about it. But if you live in a place like Woodhull,
Mhm.
down in a hole in a sense, with hills and creeks all
Mhm.
around. And all of a sudden you get 3, 4, 5, whatever, I don't know.
I don't
Remember.
remember how many
Yeah,
inches it
look
was.
it up, how many inches fell on Woodhull a few summers ago. It all rushes down.
Mhm.
And so, especially in small towns or little creeks, people build too close or they don't have any kind of embankments. And
Mhm.
so it's a flash flood. Um, somewhere along, oh, I know what I wanted to do, floods. Do you remember in the news what happened to Pakistan a few months ago?
Oh, yeah.
How much of their land was flooded? Do you remember
I
that?
don't remember how much. A huge. Yeah.
Deeper. So look at the map of America, guys. Draw that line down through the middle of Kansas, through
Mhm.
Pratt, Kansas. Um, choose the eastern half or the western half. I don't care. It would all be underwater if we
Right.
were Pakistan, and it was similar.
Mhm.
So flooding, not only can you lose lives, you lose your home, your business, your farmland,
Mhm.
infrastructure,
Mhm.
and I can't imagine how Pakistan's going to get back on its
Mm-mm.
feet. It's going to take decades to get back to where it was. So that's a big flood, not a flash flood.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about freezing rain. Freezing rain, what did we call it? Did we do this before we started? What's another name for freezing rain? What are you warned on the news? They call it what? What kind of ice?
Black ice?
Black ice. Partly because the pavements are usually black
Oh,
asphalt
sure.
and you can't see it. You know,
Mhm.
it's a very thin layer.
Mhm.
You walk out your doorstep and wham, there you go.
Yep.
So freezing rain is very costly for, let me make sure I got everything here. It's also called an ice storm. And it causes what can happen with if it's a good heavy ice storm?
Well, I know, like, it can get on the power lines and in the roof. Because it's heavy, it
It's
can,
heavy.
yeah.
So not only does it break your expensive
Mhm.
shrubbery, but you're without power
Mhm.
sometimes. And I was going to look it up, and once again, I didn't. So I'm going to give
I think
an
we,
average. Did we look up that big one up in Ontario
I
and
think
Quebec,
we have.
Canada? Did we
This
find the
is
date?
from Watertown in
Okay.
91.
No, that was a different. 91 was a different one.
Okay.
Okay, 91 was when we'll talk about that one because that one hit here too. But you can leave the picture up. I was listening to the CBC out of Toronto all the time in those days, up on a hill. I think I was the furthest person to receive their signal, their radio station, all the way from Toronto. And I think it was in the late 80s or the early 90s. And it happened in Quebec and parts of Ontario. And they call it in French the freezing rain. No, the silver rain,
Mm.
which I think is a beautiful imagery of it, a deadly event. But the Quebec, or was it Montreal? One or the other, those two big cities in Quebec, had four main, those huge power lines that come in from the power
Oh, yeah.
stations. Four of those kept the city in light and heat, and three of them went down.
Oh, wow.
And all those, the way we do chickens these days, a million chickens in
Mhm.
a chicken house, and they depend on the air vents.
Mhm.
Well, it all went down. and Within an hour, millions of chickens were dead from the
Mm.
fumes, the ammonia gas
Mhm.
in the chicken house. Um, all the dairy
Mhm.
farmers nowadays don't know how to milk a cow without the
Mhm.
electric milker.
Mhm.
So the Amish and the Mennonites came in from out in the country to help the bigger
Mm.
dairy farms with the
Mhm.
milking. So, and it lasted for weeks. It took them weeks to get
Mm.
everything back online. Our adventure was, you want to pick that one up? We can just leave the images up if you want.
Mm.
It was in 91 and it was a freak ice storm. It was fairly narrow, although if this one was from where did you say? Over
Watertown.
Watertown. But the majority was a very narrow band, about 80 miles wide from Lake Ontario down through Binghamton and on south into Pennsylvania. And we and Alfred were on the edge of it. And it started in the evening. I think it was a Sunday night. And by Monday morning, all the lights were out. And they stayed out for 5 days and a half on the hilltop. I remember going down the next day into Alfred, into the big kill room with all those kills. And for the first time ever, it was quiet. There was no noise in there because we had lost our power. So freezing rain can be quite hazardous to your people get killed in road crashes, your lights go out. It's a real nuisance. But how does it happen? I had always assumed, I mentioned to Melanie, I'd learned something totally new this week, which I always love to do when I think I know everything about something, then I find out no, I don't. I had thought if the ground was cold, below 32, and it started to rain, say it was in the 30s, low 30s, that when the rain hit the ground, it would freeze, and that would cause a freezing rain. Doesn't that make sense? But and that happens once in a while. But most often what it is that the rain starts out as that super cooled rain from a pure, almost pure air mass. No particles to speak of. So it's just water drops. And they keep getting colder and colder and colder. So when they splat down on your pavement, they instantly go to ice. So that's what a freezing rain is. And here we have, oh, the other problem is you don't want to touch one of those electric lines. And you probably don't want to walk in any water that they're lying in either, right? Because you can get electrocuted. Alrighty. Okay, let's move on to snow.
Think.
What kind of snow do we have? Where'd you find that?
I don't know. Rainbow on these. There's
Rainbow.
also. Is this?
We've all had fun doing this, haven't we?
Must. Oh, and then there's the 88.
Oh, the blue. Okay, let's go back. Okay, let's talk about snow. Once again, you want to give me a few phrases that we have for snow? It's funny how
My brain goes blank.
you on a spot, your brain just goes. Your brain goes blank.
Blizzard.
A blizzard,
Squall.
a squall, a snow squall,
A snow
because
squall.
squalls also can happen at sea, right?
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay, snow squall. Which
Lakefront. Or
a lake effect?
lake effect.
We have a special fondness for that particular type of snow. Although we're lucky, we're on the edge of that. We don't usually get that. What about a dusting?
Oh yeah, a
Okay.
dusting.
Well,
That's what we have.
yeah, long time ago, I remember reading about the Inuit up in the north and how because they live with the snow. They're like people who live with horses and they differentiate the color. Or as it turns out, the Arabs in the desert have many words for the desert and the dust, the color and the type. And when I skied many years ago, I had a package of wax to wax my skis, and there were 6 different kinds depending on the kind of snow.
Sure.
The only kind I remember was the powder snow
Yep.
and the wet, icy snow, which caused me to sprain my ankle once.
Yeah.
Wreck my skis. But anyway,
There's like snowman packing snow.
yeah. Oh, right. Well, that would be the wet, heavy snow. Yep. Okay, but we're nowhere near as good as the Inuit with that. Alrighty. Up. Oh, and did you know when the temperature is close to freezing, let's say 28 to 32, that's when you're going to get your big fluffy flakes coming down. The colder it gets, the smaller they get.
Yeah.
All right.
Is it true that no two snowflakes are the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
If you're interested in, we have 1 or 2 books here, one of which I think I gave on snowflakes, and I forget who it was, and I think it was in the 40s or the 50s. He was a photography nut and a weather nut, and he decided he was gonna somehow take pictures of all these snowflakes. And he developed a system where the plate was cold, the glass or whatever it was, and they were all different. Basically 6-sided.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we won't go into ice crystals because they come in different,
Mm.
really different kinds of things. But, yep, okay, so they're all different. Billions and billions billions of them, right? Now, did we look up, and you can look up if we didn't, a blizzard by definition is a combination of the amount of snow that's
Mm.
falling and it's the how far through it can you see,
Okay.
and the wind speed. I always connect blizzards with a lot of wind, but I think the definition is 6 miles an hour.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but if you're driving along
Sure.
and all of a sudden you have a whiteout
Yeah.
because of visibility, and I don't know, it might be like a half a mile
Mm.
at 6 miles an hour, then it becomes a blizzard.
Mm.
Well, one of the most famous blizzards, and once again, this is the Hornell Library has a book on this, The Blizzard of 88, 1888. And my grandmother, who was 16 years old, had just come from Germany that year. And of course, Europe, because of the Gulf Stream, at the same latitude, doesn't have nearly as cold winters as we do. So she comes over to take care of her dad and her uncle at 16 in New York City. And in March, they have the grand blizzard of 88. And I remember her, I'm gonna say the wind came out of the east, but I'm not sure. You could double check that. But my grandmother told me when I was little that on the one side of the street, the snow drifted 3 stories high in the tenement buildings. So if you lived in those buildings on the first or second floor, inside the stairways, you had to climb up to the 3rd floor apartment of somebody and climb out the window to get out of your apartment. Whereas the other side of the street, it was fairly not that high. But here we have some pictures of the snow back in 1888 in New York City, one of the worst blizzards on the northeast coast. And I'm guessing it was a northeaster, which we'll talk about when we talk about weather systems and wind patterns in a couple of times. All righty. Alrighty. I don't know how to get to the next picture, so when Melanie comes back from the desk, we're going to look at something called hoarfrost. Do we have hoarfrost? There she is.
I don't know if we have ever
Do you have any frost?
wind.
Ooh, isn't that beautiful? Alrighty. Hoar means white. And that's why when we say somebody's hoary, meaning old because of white hair and a beard. I didn't realize that, one of those
Yeah.
implied concepts, but really it means white. So a white frost. And what happens here is the humid, cold air goes directly vapor to ice, skips the water part. Now, if it's the other way around, what happens to your mothballs? Do you use mothballs? Doesn't use mothballs. Well, now that everybody has polyester everything, you don't need mothballs. But in the old days, when you had wool rugs, wool scarves, sweaters, and you stored them in the chest for the summertime, if you didn't do something, the moths would get in, they'd lay their eggs, the larvae would eat up your wool sweater. You'd wind up with holes in your sweater. So you took mothballs, which is camphor, and put them in with your clothes in the chest to keep the moths away. You never found a puddle of camphor. They just slowly disappeared.
Oh.
Magic. They went from a solid to a gas directly.
Oh.
No in between stage. And we call that sublimation. So this is the opposite, where the moisture, the vapor in the air goes from a gas directly to the crystals, the ice on the surfaces, in this case, some leaves lying on the ground. And we call it a hoarfrost. And one of the most beautiful hoarfrosts I've ever experienced was years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I was driving early in the morning from up towards Canandaigua, New York, back to Alfred, and came over the hill into the valley where Wayland is located. And the sun had just come up, It had been a clear night, and the village, from the view of the road coming down the hill, was like an absolute Curry and Ives winter scene. Everything, trees, roof lines, power lines, was covered with hoarfrost, and it was absolutely amazing and beautiful. When vapor crystallizes directly out, we call it deposition, the opposite of sublimation. Alrighty, what else? Oh, and Melanie brought up last time, or maybe it was Rima the time before, rime ice, which I wasn't going to include because it's kind of unusual, but I just decided we'd stick it in. Rime ice, do we have a picture of that?
I don't think we do.
That's more rare. R-I-M-E.
I don't think we do.
And lots of times it seems to happen near the seacoast for some reason. Maybe because in the old days of sailing ships, it was a problem. But anyway, rime ice happens when you have that super cool water droplets, and they then condense directly from the super cool water to the ice crystals. And is that right? The snow crystals. Snow crystals, sorry. So super cooled water droplets glom onto snow crystals, and you wind up with something called rime ice. All right. Now, I don't think we got a picture of this, and maybe I didn't ask. Do we have diamond dust?
I don't think we do have a picture of it.
This, to me, after that hoarfrost, the diamond dust is the most beautiful type of precipitation that I can imagine, because you get up in the morning and it's really cold.
No, we don't.
Okay, no picture. Gotta imagine it in your mind, guys. It's 10 degrees out and absolutely clear and blue, and it's been clear all night long. Very cold, down near zero. Sun comes up, and all of a sudden, in the clear blue air, well, the air in front of you is not blue, are these tiny little sparkles, like tiny little prisms, tiny little diamonds making the rainbow. And they're on the ground everywhere. So diamond dust. Once again, did I write down how it's made? Vapor to crystals. Once again, the deposition. It goes from the gaseous form directly to a crystal form. And you see these tiny little crystals floating around in the air. Alrighty. Sleet. Do we have a picture of sleet?
Oh, I don't know. We have hail. Oh, yes, we do.
Sleet. Is that it? It's falling?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's a picture. Someone's taking a picture towards the house, it looks like, with a tree or so in the background. And you see the sleet falling. Well, that one's fairly easy. The atmosphere up above, let's say 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 10,000 feet, whatever it is, a warm front has come in. And so the air up above, warm, is less dense, so it's on top of the colder air, closer to the ground. And starts to rain. Starts out as rain. When it hits that 32-degree air layer, it freezes the raindrops into little spheres of ice.
Okay.
And then they fall to the ground as sleet. And of course, the thicker that cold layer is, the bigger the sleet particles will be. Okay. Yes, where do I go next on my little chart? Okay, hail. Oddly enough, hail happens what time of the year? Summertime. Sometimes spring, sometimes fall, but usually we think of it as happening in the summertime. Do you, not to put you on the spot, but how are we doing on time?
We are at 12:04.
Oh, so we have time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. How many time? You know how hail is formed?
I think I do.
Okay. Think of that huge. Remember in the summertime, we started with fair weather clouds,
Yeah.
but if it's a very humid day and the air is unstable, those clouds can keep growing as the day grows on.
Okay.
Usually for us, thunderstorms occur in the afternoon
Yeah.
or the early evening. and it gets bigger and bigger and goes higher and higher and begins to suck in. It starts this huge convection current where the warm air is rising up in the middle, but then as it cools, it begins to float down around the outside. If a raindrop gets caught up in that convection current and the cloud is high enough, 20, 30,000 feet, all the way up to the stratosphere, it gets caught up and then it starts to fall down. Gets caught up again. And it goes around and around.
Okay.
Depending on how powerful the storm is. Involves latent heat. When we talk about tornadoes and hurricanes, we'll go into that more. The more round trips it can take, and every round trip it takes, it gets bigger.
Okay.
Because when it comes back down through the rain part, the warm, it picks up more water
Sure.
on its core. And then as it's tossed up above the it freezes again. So in a really violent thunderstorm, you can get hail, I hear tell, as big as golf balls. I don't want to get hit in the head with that.
No. What makes it finally fall and get out of that convection?
The power of the storm is only is so great. And
Okay.
eventually the weight
Okay.
overcomes the uplift
Sure.
and down it comes.
Okay.
It's like a feather floating in the air to some extent. Eventually it reaches a point where it can fall.
Sure.
But depending on how many round trips it's made, it gets bigger and bigger. And so if you slice one in half, it has rings in it, just like one of those red and white onions, with the rings. So you can count the trips.
Okay.
Just like the tree. You can
Right.
count the year.
Okay. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. Alrighty. I wanted to once again to tell a tale of me and my grandson when he was around 9 or 10, visiting me for the summer, and it was hot. I don't know, July or August, and it was very hot and humid. And for some reason, we had to go to Wellsville and then to Belmont, and then we were coming home. I forget why. The triangle. And we were in Wellsville. It was probably around 2 PM, and it was 85 and humid. And I don't usually use my air conditioning. I suffer the weather. So anyway, we were done with Wellsville and we had turned up 19, and it's about 10 miles or so to Belmont. And you could see there to the north, this huge thundercloud system had moved in from the northwest, and it was moving over Belmont straight ahead of us. And I said to Jordan, I said, you know what? It's going to be a lot cooler, but when we get to Belmont. He said, really? Why? I said, well, you watch. And we had I love it, a temperature gauge in the car where you could see what the outside temperature was. I said, now you watch that and you read off what the temperature is as we drive north. And every mile it dropped 1 degree. And by the time I had estimated it'd be 75 when we got to Belmont, and it was. So once again, the power of the updraft. And then you can't have a vacuum. So what fills that? The downdraft, which comes from way up high, and it's colder. So it cools down very rapidly and also pours that you get there. So that was kind of a fun, right up front experiment of seeing it happen on the ground. All right. Well, over here. All right. I thought what other pictures have we forgot? Did we have anything else that we didn't look at?
I think that was all of them.
Yeah, I think so too.
Hail.
What was this one here?
That was the Western New York blizzard.
Okay.
But yeah, that's it.
Okay. Oh, I don't know. Did I mention that? I might have forgotten that. The summer, the March of 91, I think it was. And I think it was, did I mention that? I forget sometimes what I do here. I think that was part of one of those northeasters, but it was so huge that we're only as the crow flies, maybe 300 miles from the ocean. So if it's coming right up the coast and it's like 700, 800 miles wide, we're going to get caught up in the western end of it.
Sure.
And once again, it was spring break. Everybody was on spring break. They were supposed to come home that Sunday, and classes were to start Monday. And we did have warnings for this one. And I had a friend, Jackie, down in Florida, another friend in North Carolina, Neva, and then there was me. And Jackie had called up. She was on one of those outward bound on a sailboat kind of deal with kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I had called her a day or two before and said, "Hey, you know, this big storm is coming. What are you guys doing?" She said, "We're running for harbor. Stay out here in the."
Right.
So they got in safe. And then Saturday, it started Friday night or Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And it snowed and it snowed. Just like a
Mhm.
fairy tale. No wind. So it just came up to the windowsills by the end of Saturday.
Mhm.
4 feet everywhere
Mhm.
in Alfred. And I called my friend Neva in North Carolina because they don't usually have that much snow down there. And I said to her, "What are you guys doing with the snow?" And she said, "Well, every hour I go out with my dustpan and I scoop it off my short sidewalk."
Oh, wow.
Anyway, it was, you had to just, I remember late in the day looking out the window and just laughing. I mean,
Mhm.
it was ridiculous. 4
Mhm.
feet everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was Saturday. So Sunday, I guess the university anyway, and I don't know about the tech, university somehow called everybody, all the
Mm.
students, the 3,000 students,
Mhm.
whatever they are, don't try and come back to
Mhm.
school because we're not going to be open for the week.
Right.
And that was the only time the town crew couldn't plow my road.
Mm.
The first half mile is in the woods,
Mm-hmm.
but then just past me, it's open
Mm-hmm.
from the west to the east. And by Sunday, the wind picked up.
Mm-hmm.
So the plow came by and he got a little ways out and then
Oh,
backed
yeah.
up and then later in the day, the grader came
Mm.
and he managed to open up McAndrews
Mm.
Road. The big grader did.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but we were kind of like stuck in the snow for,
I was
where were you?
I was 7,
Okay.
6 or 7.
You should have
And
put that picture in.
I should have brought the picture and so
In
I
Wellsville?
grew up in Whitesville.
Whitesville.
Um
Okay.
and I have a picture of my dad had just shoveled out the driveway.
By hand?
Yeah, by
By
hand.
hand?
And the I don't know how tall you are when you're 7, but the snow was at least 3 feet over my head.
Right. By the time he got done shoveling it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that took a while to melt down.
Mhm.
Yeah. So anyway, that was a,
Remember, I don't think we had school that at all that week. It
no,
was like
no, you couldn't get
5
anywhere.
days of
Yeah. I'm driving your mother crazy.
yeah. My mom was ready for us to go back.
Okay, so I just wanted to wrap up with two things. Damage caused by
Mhm.
the weather.
Mhm.
Floods, we talked about, you know, people dying.
Mhm.
I'm not sure we were on air when we talked about the flood of
Yep.
72, but roughly 40 people in Corning died
Mhm.
when the water went over their supposedly, what do you call those?
Levies?
Levees. Yep, breached the levees, went over the top, and all the low-lying people got caught out in the middle of the night.
Do they know, do they have an estimate of how much money
Was lost.
was, yeah,
I know, but I'm sure once again online that
Sure.
information is out there. I know one of the reasons downtown Corning looks like it does
Mhm.
now is because it had to be totally
Mhm.
renovated because downtown Corning, the ground floor, if not 1.5 floors, went underwater.
And well, like in Wellsville, like with the
Was that when the hospital wing went,
yeah,
right?
yep,
I forgot about that.
yeah. So that looks
Noise? No,
totally
no.
different.
What's the Wellsville Hospital? Jones Memorial?
Jones, yep.
They had that new wing, fairly
Mhm.
new, and it just got swept off its
Yeah.
foundations. They had to move everybody.
Mhm.
Um, that must have been scary. Well, it was an adventurous time.
Yeah.
So lives, property, um, infrastructure,
Mhm.
bridges, all of that costs a fortune
Mhm.
to replace.
I thought I had read about the railroad in Hornell. Oh, I can't remember what it was called.
The Erie
Yeah,
Railroad, probably.
yeah. And it eventually went bankrupt because of
Of all of that.
the damage caused to their railroad lines.
Right, because it started here
Mhm.
in the up around this area, but then think about it. All the rivers, well, I happen to live right on the watershed,
Mhm.
so my runoff goes down into Dykes Creek, is it, that goes into Wells?
Oh,
That
yeah,
goes
yeah.
north into the Genesee. But people in Alfred and on east, it all goes down into the Susquehanna.
Okay.
So, and that's the Erie Railroad was basically, down all through.
Yep.
So it lost a lot of its track.
Mhm.
Yep. Okay. And then there's drought. Most of us don't think of dying in a
Mhm.
drought. However, in places like Ethiopia,
Mhm.
millions of people, if we didn't feed them, would be
Mhm.
dead because of the drought there. We're lucky in America, we don't experience that extent of
Mhm.
drought, but it definitely affects our food and our income,
Mhm.
to say nothing of wildlife and all of that. Then the freezing rain. I think that for a lot of us, because it's sneaky.
Mhm.
Now, once again, I don't remember exactly the year. I'm going to say the late 80s. And it was Christmas time. I was doing a craft show here in Alfred,
Mhm.
on that weekend, Saturday, I think it was. And I live on the top of Jericho
Mhm.
Hill. And back in those days, the Steuben Trust Bank downtown
Mhm.
had a temperature clock,
Mm.
which I love, right there with the big old hickory tree
Mhm.
in its front yard on Main Street. And I was very aware of the fact that I live 400 feet higher at the top of Jericho Hill than the
Mhm.
village, roughly 18 versus 2,200 feet.
Mhm.
And that means whatever it is in Alfred, it's going to be 3 degrees colder on the top of the
Mm.
hill. So if it's like 34, 35 in the village and
Mhm.
it's raining, I know to beware that
Mhm.
it might be snowing or freezing rain on the top of the hill.
Right.
Unfortunately, the two new banks, or maybe three since then, have done away with the temperature clock, which I
Mhm.
think is not being civic minded.
Mhm.
Guys, put the clock back in the temperature
Mm.
gauge. Anyway, the disaster was, I don't know if you remember this, it involved two groups of tech students that were in the nursing program, or at least
Mm.
two carloads, one coming back from the tech campus
Mm.
in the late in the morning, and the other one going to Wellsville. And once again, it was that
Mhm.
right on the edge, and it was freezing on the top of the hill.
Mhm.
Somebody lost control, and 3 people got killed up
Oh.
there that
Mm.
Saturday. I think it was a Saturday, because I was at the craft show, I think, when it happened. Which is one of the reasons years later they lowered the hill. Are
Mm.
you aware of
I
that?
was not. No.
Once again, the recent past, 15 years ago, 20
Mhm.
maybe, the state finally decided they would make that safer by dropping it 3 feet and cutting the woods back.
Mhm.
All it did was make people drive faster.
Mhm.
Or go to the blind
Yeah.
curve at the
Yeah.
top of the hill there.
Yep.
All right. So, the other memory I have of that, back in the day when Doug Burdick, our own town supervisor, was in charge of the roads,
Mhm.
and I had a blues show on WALF, the
Mhm.
college station, Sunday night, 9 to midnight. Now, anybody that lives out
Mhm.
knows that depending on the snow and the weather, the plows will come by Sunday morning for the churchgoers. And maybe if it's bad, they might come by in early afternoon to clear the roads again so
Mhm.
people can get home. Forget about the night shift.
Mhm.
And I'd get off a little after midnight down in the village and have to drive home up the
Mhm.
hill. So if the weather was bad, I would always go the back road by Foster Lake
Mhm.
because it's not as steep a climb. So one night, one of those nights, it's about going on 12:30. I'm headed home around Foster Lake up to the top of Jericho Hill there. And I see this white pickup truck sitting on the side of the road
Mm.
at the top of the hill. And so I rolled down my window and I yell out, "Do you need any help? Are you stuck?" And it was Doug Burdick.
Oh.
He said, "No, I'm fine. Is that you, Mary Lou?" And I said, "Yes. What are you doing?" "Yeah, I'm checking the thermometer." I said, "What? What thermometer?" He said, "Well, I've got a thermometer tied to this sign at the top of the hill." And he said, "When the weather's like this, I always come out to make sure that it's not below 32, because then I have to get out one of the sanders." Now, that to me is dedication to the job that you don't find that much anymore, I'm sorry to say,
Mhm.
where a man would get out of his warm bed, come up to the top of Jericho Hill to check that damn
Mhm.
thermometer to see if it was still above freezing. And if it wasn't, he would go back and get out the sander
Mm.
and sand Jericho Hill. Now, The county doesn't do nearly as good a job when they took
Mhm.
over. But anyway, we miss Doug and people like him that really took their responsibilities seriously. So there he was at midnight, 12:30,
Mhm.
checking out the thermometer on the top of Jericho Hill, because he knew it could be colder up there than down below. All righty, what else? We already mentioned that big power outage
Mhm.
of 92. I forget what time of the year that was, but for me on the hill, I was out for 5.5 days.
Mm.
I'm so glad I have a wood stove,
Mhm.
and I knew it was coming. I did have
Mhm.
warning on that one. And so I had a lot of pots of water sitting around.
Mm.
I had water to drink. But anyway, what's this one? Okay, mentioned that. And we mentioned the blizzard of 91 with the 4 feet.
Mhm.
When I drove west on Interstate 80 once, which is a northern route across the states, through Wyoming, through
Mhm.
Salt Lake City, I remember you're on the high plains, and this was in the summertime, and you get to the Wyoming border from Nebraska, I believe, Interstate 80, and I noticed something very strange. You know how we used to have snow fences?
Mm.
Once again, they're too lazy. They don't put them up anymore, hardly ever. You
Mhm.
hardly ever see snow fences anymore, but they used to. Well, out there, our snow fences were like 3 feet high.
Mhm.
Out there, they were huge, like 8, 10 feet high,
Mm.
and I don't know, 100, 200 feet long. And they were in tiers, 50 feet off the interstate,
Mm.
another 100 feet up the hill, another 100 feet up.
Mm.
And then there were these huge gates, and you hear about it once in a while on the news. As a matter of fact, my guess is they've closed the interstates out there because of the big snowstorm that's
Oh,
coming
yep.
through Colorado. They just shut the gates. You have to get off
Mm.
and motel it or sleep in
Mhm.
your car or something. They don't let you drive through
Mhm.
the blizzards out there. And finally, hail. Um, I always worry once in a while. You do get sometimes a weather report in the summer saying chance of hail, and I'm thinking, oh, my tomatoes are just getting red.
Oh, yeah.
But I've been lucky. We haven't ever had any real damage.
Mhm.
But some of the big crops in the Midwest and in Tornado Alley, you could just about be ready to harvest your soybeans or your wheat or whatever, and a hailstorm can come through in 5 minutes and wipe you out,
Mhm.
or your car.
Yeah. Oh,
Lots
your
of
car.
dents, no paint. All right, do we have time for this extra thing I was going to slip in
Sure.
about? Okay. By the way, next time, which will be just about the day before New Year's Eve. How did that happen?
Mhm.
We're going to talk about the wind,
Mm.
which is another great topic.
Mhm.
The wind. All righty. I wanted to go over because I never quite understood it until once again recently reading all this stuff about the weather. The fact of water and ice,
Mhm.
and ice floats.
Mhm.
Now that breaks all the rules of the universe as we know them, or
Mhm.
at least earthly rules. Whatever you're dealing with, a material, almost all of them, the colder they get, they shrink
Mhm.
and they get denser.
Mhm.
Same volume, it's heavier. And so you would think as water in the winter gets colder and colder, thinking my pond,
Mhm.
the ocean,
Mhm.
it was the ice, when it got to 32, it would be denser than 34 or 40, and it
Mhm.
would sink to the bottom. If that happened, what would happen to the pond by the end of winter?
The water level would rise.
Or you would keep forming ice
Oh.
and you would have solid ice.
Oh, sure.
And over time, 1,000 years, the
Mhm.
whole ocean would be frozen.
Mhm.
And once it freezes, it doesn't unfreeze very easily.
Right.
So one thing, no life on Earth if water wasn't weird.
Yeah.
We should write a book, Weird Water. The kids in the 8th grade would love it. Weird water. So here's what's happened. And I don't have any pictures for this, so you're gonna have to picture it in your mind. Where did I put this down here? Let me find it first. Where is it? Doo-doo-doo-doo. Otherwise, I'll have to remember it. Ha! I'll have to remember it. I didn't put it down. Let's picture a pond in the summertime. Have you ever swum in the ponds around here? Do you like to float on the top, or do you like
I
to
like to
put
be
your
on the top.
Why do you like to be on the top?
It's warmer.
It's warmer. Once again, we don't live in the tropics yet, so our farm ponds tend to stay pretty cold throughout the short, what used to be short summers. But water, normally, like everything else, the warmer it is, the sun is heating it from the top, assuming you don't have any hot springs
Right.
or a volcano underneath you,
Right.
right? So it's the top layers that are going to be warmed in May, June, July. So yeah, you kind of float and swim in the top 6 inches of the farm pond, because when you go upright, your feet go down and it's cold down there.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the normal state of affairs. Now comes autumn. So the air every day begins to get more or less cooler and cooler and cooler. And so that top layer of the pond gets cooler until it reaches 39 degrees. Magic number. At which now it's, getting cooler, so it's sinking. So after a short while in the fall, the bottom of the pond is going to be 39 degrees because it's getting denser, so it sinks. But it's still autumn, it's still getting cooler. So gradually, the top of the pond gets cooler and cooler and cooler until you reach the point where it's 33 degrees. But the bottom now is 39 degrees because it's denser. The old-fashioned phrase was the pond is turned over. And we like that because it stirs up the nutrients for next year for the fish and whatever. But then when it hits 32 at the top, it starts to freeze. And so the ice, in a sense, forms on the top is less dense than the dense 39 at the bottom. And it's so it stays on the top and doesn't sink to the bottom. So ice, a skim, and then it gets thicker, and eventually, I don't know, 6 inches, a foot, before you can go out on the ice with your snowmobile and drill holes for fishing, something like that. And once again, it's all because of how the molecules hook up in water that create this very strange substance we call water. That's different almost than everything else on the planet and allows life to exist. Yeah.
Cool.
So it's probably, the reeds have grown. I need to scoop out my pond again. So I can't really see it from the house anymore. But I'm sure we've had a few nights now down in the low 20s that at least a skim of ice has formed on the shallow ponds.
Yeah.
Any questions? We have any
I
time left?
don't
I'm
think so.
right out.
We are
Things to
done.
talk about.
We are done.